He walked onto the plane thinking his net worth gave him the right to rule the cabin. He saw a black woman in seat 1A and decided she didn't belong, that she was a mistake, a placeholder, a target for his arrogance. He spent 7 hours humiliating her, bragging about his connections, and threatening to destroy her life. But he made one fatal miscalculation. Harrison Wells didn't know that the woman he was terrorizing wasn't just a passenger. She was Dr. Vivienne Clark, the newly appointed chairwoman of the entire airline, and by the time they landed, he wouldn't just lose his seat, he would lose everything. This is the story of the ultimate regret. The air inside the John F. Kennedy International Airport Terminal 4 private suites smelled of white tea and fig, a scent engineered to lower the blood pressure of people who had too much money and too little patience. But it wasn't working on Harrison Wells. Harrison stood at the reception desk, tapping a manicured fingernail against the marble countertop. He was 45, wearing a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than the receptionist's car, and he carried himself with the frantic, aggressive energy of a man whose self-worth was entirely tied to his stock portfolio. He was the CEO of Wellstream, a mid-tier logistics tech firm that had done well during the last fiscal quarter, inflating his ego to dangerous proportions. "I specifically requested the pre-boarding escort," Harrison snapped, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "The flight to London departs in 40 minutes. If I have to stand in line with the general boarding groups, the herd, I will be speaking to your supervisor's supervisor." The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah with the patience of a saint, typed rapidly. "Mr. Wells, the escort is ready. We were just waiting for the final clearance on the aircraft. It's a Boeing 777-300ER, the new flagship configuration. We want to ensure the cabin is pristine for you." "It better be," Harrison grumbled, snatching his boarding pass. "I paid $12,000 for seat 1A. I expect privacy. I expect silence. And I expect the champagne to be chilled before my ass hits the leather." He turned, not waiting for her reply, and signaled to the personal concierge waiting to guide him. As he walked through the exclusive corridor toward the jet bridge, Harrison felt a familiar surge of superiority. This was his world, the world of the 1%, where doors opened automatically and no was a word spoken only to other people. He had had a rough week. A merger had stalled, and his board of directors was breathing down his neck. He needed this flight to London to close a deal with a British manufacturing giant. He needed to feel powerful again. He needed to feel like the king of the castle. He stepped onto the plane, bypassing the smiling flight attendants at the door with barely a nod. He turned left, heading toward the sanctity of first class. The cabin was a masterpiece of modern aviation design. Soft, ambient lighting, individual suites with sliding doors, and the hush of expensive insulation. He marched toward seat 1A, the prime spot, the seat he always booked. The seat that signaled he was the alpha on this metal bird. But he stopped dead in the aisle. Seat 1A was occupied. Sitting there, looking completely at ease, was a black woman. She appeared to be in her early 50s, wearing a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit that looked professional, but, in Harrison's eyes, lacked the flashy branding he associated with wealth. Her hair was styled in intricate braids, pulled back into an elegant bun. She was reading a thick document on a tablet, a pair of rimless glasses perched on her nose. She didn't look up as he loomed over the suite. Harrison blinked. He checked his boarding pass. 1A. He looked back at the woman. A hot, ugly flush crept up his neck. It wasn't just that someone was in his seat, mistakes happened. It was who was in his seat. In Harrison's narrow, prejudiced worldview, first class was the domain of tech bros, old money heirs, and corporate titans. It wasn't the place for her. He immediately categorized her. An upgrade. A contest winner. An employee using non-revenue space. "Excuse me," Harrison said, his voice loud enough to cut through the serene silence of the cabin. The woman didn't jump. She didn't look startled. She simply finished reading the paragraph she was on, tapped the screen of her tablet, and slowly raised her eyes. They were dark, calm, and terrifyingly intelligent. "Yes?" she asked. Her voice was low, modulated, with a transatlantic accent that was hard to place. "You're in my seat," Harrison stated, thrusting his boarding pass toward her face. 1A. "I booked this 3 weeks ago." The woman glanced at the boarding pass, then back at him. "I believe there's a mistake, sir. but I am quite settled. Settled? Harrison let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. This isn't a movie theater, sweetheart. You don't just grab a spot you like. This is an international first-class cabin. Check your ticket. You're probably in 10A or 40A, back near the toilets. The woman took a slow breath. She removed her glasses, folding them deliberately. My name is Dr. Clark, and I assure you, I am supposed to be here. Perhaps you should check with the purser if there is a confusion regarding seat assignments. I don't need to check with the help, Harrison sneered, leaning in closer, invading her personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne, something musky and overpowering, wafted into the suite. I know how this works. The airline overbooked, or you used some miles you scraped together from buying groceries, and you snagged an upgrade. Good for you. But when a full-fare paying customer shows up, that's me you move. That's the hierarchy. Dr. Clark looked at him, her expression unreadable. She wasn't angry. She looked almost curious, like a scientist observing a rat in a maze. Hierarchy? She repeated softly. Is that what you think this is? I think you're in my seat, Harrison snapped. He turned around and shouted toward the galley. Attendant, hey, we have a squatter situation here. Sarah? The flight attendant who had checked him in at the lounge and had rushed ahead to prep the cabin, hurried over. She looked stressed. She knew Harrison's reputation. Mr. Wells, please, lower your voice. What seems to be the problem? The problem, Harrison gestured wildly at Dr. Clark, is that this individual is in 1A. I am 1A. Move her. Sarah looked at Dr. Clark, then back at Harrison, her face paling slightly. Mr. Wells, there was a last-minute equipment change and a manifest update. Dr. Clark she is meant to be in 1A. We have moved you to 2A. It is the exact same suite, directly behind this one. Same amenities, same service. Harrison's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with the cabin's mood lighting. You bumped me? You bumped Harrison Wells for her? He pointed a finger at Dr. Clark, who had gone back to reading her tablet, completely ignoring his tantrum. It is an operational necessity, sir, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. Please, boarding is continuing. If you could just take your seat in 2A. I don't want 2A, Harrison hissed. I want the bulkhead. I want the privacy. I don't want to stare at the back of someone's head for 7 hours. He leaned down, bringing his face close to Dr. Clark's ear, especially someone who clearly doesn't belong here. Dr. Clark froze. The cabin went deadly silent. A businessman in 3A lowered his newspaper. Dr. Clark turned her head slowly. Mr. Wells, was it? I suggest you take your seat. You are delaying the flight. Don't tell me what to do, Harrison spat. You think because you got lucky with a computer glitch, you're suddenly royalty? I know your type. You talk loud, you bring smelly food onto the plane, and you treat the crew like dirt. You're going to ruin the ambiance of this entire flight. Sarah, the flight attendant, stepped in between them, a brave move. Mr. Wells, that is enough. Take your seat now, or I will have to call the gate agent to have you removed. Harrison straightened his jacket, scoffing. Removed? You wouldn't dare. I'm a Platinum Elite member. I spend more on this airline in a year than you make in a decade. I'll sit in 2A. But mark my words, he glared at the top of Dr. Clark's head. I'm going to make sure corporate hears about this displacement. And I'm going to make sure they know exactly the kind of clientele they are prioritizing over business leaders. He slammed his carry-on bag into the overhead bin above 2A with unnecessary force, rattling the frame. He threw himself into the seat, huffing loudly. Dr. Clark didn't turn around. She simply tapped her earpiece. Yes, James, she said quietly, presumably speaking to someone on a call, though Harrison assumed she was pretending to look busy. We might have a bit of turbulence on the ground. Nothing the structure can't handle. Let's proceed with the checklist. Harrison kicked the back of seat 1A. A petty, childish thud. Enjoy the view while it lasts, he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Back of the bus is calling your name. He pulled out his phone and immediately began typing a furious email to his assistant, demanding she find the contact information for the airline's vice president of customer experience. He was going to get this woman blacklisted. He was going to get the flight attendant fired. He had no idea that the email he was threatening to send would eventually land on the desk of the woman sitting 3 feet in front of him. Dr. Vivienne Clark. An MIT-educated aerospace engineer, former NASA consultant, and as of 3 days ago, the chairwoman of the board for Horizon Global Airways stared at the data on her screen. It was a report on cabin pressure differentials, but her mind was briefly on the man behind her. She had dealt with men like Harrison Wells her entire life, in lecture halls where professors assumed she was the janitor, in boardrooms where CEOs asked her to fetch coffee before realizing she was the lead consultant. She had developed a thick skin, a carapace of steel. Usually, she would let it slide. She was too busy for petty vendettas. But today she was tired. She was flying to London to oversee a massive restructuring of the airline's European hub. She was carrying the weight of 50,000 employees on her shoulders, and Harrison Wells had just kicked her seat. Vivian minimized the technical report and opened a new window on her secure tablet. She accessed the passenger manifest. She scrolled down to 2A. Harrison Wells, CEO, Wellstream. Loyalty status, Platinum. Notes, frequent complaints, high maintenance. Flagged for verbal abuse of staff in 2023 warning issued. Strike 2, Mr. Wells, she whispered to herself. She didn't turn around. She didn't engage. She knew that the most painful punishment for a man like him wasn't a shouting match. It was the slow, agonizing realization of his own insignificance. The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety video began to play. Harrison Wells ordered a double scotch before the wheels even left the tarmac, loudly complaining that the ice wasn't cubed properly. The drama was just beginning. And 30,000 feet in the air, there was nowhere for him to run. The seatbelt sign pinged off as the Boeing 777 leveled out over the Atlantic. The cabin was a sanctuary of soft beige leather and brushed steel, designed to make the outside world disappear. But inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere was thickening with a toxicity that no air filtration system could scrub away. Harrison Wells had already finished his second scotch and was moving on to a vintage Bordeaux. The alcohol wasn't sedating him, it was acting as fuel for his grievance. He sat in 2A, staring at the back of Dr. Clark's seat as if it were a monument to his oppression. Sarah, the flight attendant, moved through the cabin with the grace of a dancer, though her smile was tight. She approached Harrison with the dinner menu. Mr. Wells, would you like to start with the caviar service or the lobster bisque? Harrison didn't look at the menu. He gestured with his wine glass toward seat 1A. What's she having? Sarah hesitated. Dr. Clark has pre-ordered a special meal, sir. Of course she has. Harrison scoffed, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Probably something fried. Or spicy. Something that's going to stink up the cabin for the rest of us. You know, back in the day, this airline had standards. Now it seems like you just let anyone dictate the menu. It is a vegan option, sir. A roasted beet salad with walnut oil, Sarah said, her voice icy. Harrison rolled his eyes. Vegan. Figures. The entitlement is off the charts. Just bring me the steak. Rare. And if it's overcooked, I'm sending it back to the economy galley where it belongs. As Sarah hurried away, Harrison leaned forward. He couldn't help himself. He tapped hard on the shell of Dr. Clark's suite. Hey! 1A, he called out. Dr. Clark lowered her noise-canceling headphones. She didn't turn around, but she tilted her head slightly, acknowledging his presence. I hope you're enjoying the free ride, Harrison sneered. Must be nice. The rest of us are busting our backs, running companies, moving the economy forward, paying taxes that probably fund your little excursion. What do you do, anyway? You look like a school teacher. Or maybe government? Yeah, you reek of government bureaucrat. Waste of taxpayer money. Vivienne Clark slowly swiveled her seat. For the first time, Harrison saw her full face in the cabin light. She looked tired, yes, but there was a hardness in her jaw that should have warned him. Mr. Wells, she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced the ambient hum of the engines. I am working. I have a very long week ahead of me. I would appreciate it if you would focus on your wine and leave me to my business. We are stuck in this tube for another 6 hours. Let's not make it a war zone. A war zone? Harrison laughed, a sharp, barking sound. You think you're a combatant? Please. I'm just trying to figure out how the airline's algorithm messed up so badly. See, I know the VP of marketing at this airline, old buddy of mine. We golf in the Hamptons. When I land, I'm going to have a chat with him. I'm going to describe you. And I'm going to ask why a non-revenue passenger was given priority over a shareholder. He took a swig of wine, spilling a drop on his lapel. He didn't notice. "You're a diversity checkmark," he spat, the alcohol loosening his filter completely. "That's all this is. The airline is trying to look inclusive, so they put you in the front window. It's a PR stunt. But don't get used to it, sweetheart. Real power, real money, it doesn't look like you." Vivienne stared at him for a long beat. She didn't blink. She looked at his flushed face, his expensive but ill-fitting suit, the desperate need for validation in his eyes. "You are right about one thing, Mr. Wells," she said softly. Harrison smirked. "Oh? Admitting defeat? Real power doesn't look like me," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Real power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to scream at flight attendants. Real power sits in silence and gets things done. You might want to remember that." She turned back around, pressing a button that slid her suite door closed, sealing him out. Harrison sat there, stunned. Then the rage hit him. She had dismissed him. She, a woman he considered beneath him in every conceivable metric, had dismissed him. He slammed his fist onto his armrest. "Open that door," he shouted. "I wasn't finished speaking to you." A man in seat 3A, a British banker named Arthur, finally spoke up. "Mate, give it a rest, will you? You're making an arse of yourself." Harrison whipped his head around. "Mind your business, Nigel. This is about standards. If we don't hold the line, the whole world goes to hell." He sat back, fuming. He pulled out his phone again. The Wi-Fi was working. He opened LinkedIn. He typed in the name the flight attendant had used. Dr. Clark. Thousands of results. He didn't know her first name. He scrolled frantically, looking for a face that matched. He found a pediatrician in Chicago, a professor in sociology, a dentist. "Nobody," he muttered to himself. "She's a nobody. Probably a mistress of some mid-level manager. That's how she got the seat." He felt satisfied with this fabrication. It fit his worldview. He drank the rest of his wine and signaled for another. When Sarah arrived, he grabbed her wrist as she placed the glass down. "Tell me," he whispered, his breath heavy with alcohol. "Who is she? Really? Did she sleep with the pilot? Is that it?" Sarah yanked her hand back, her eyes wide with shock. "Mr. Wells, do not touch me. And do not speak about other passengers that way. That is a formal warning. One more incident, and I will hand you a Section 21 notice." Section 21, Harrison mocked, though he released her. "Terrifying. Go fetch me some nuts. And make sure they're warm this time." As Sarah walked away, shaking, Harrison stared at the closed door of 1A. He was going to find out who she was, and he was going to destroy her. 2 hours later, the cabin lights were dimmed. Most passengers were sleeping. The steady drone of the engines was hypnotic, but Harrison was wide awake. The mix of alcohol, altitude, and rage had created a buzzing energy in his veins. He needed to use the lavatory. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stumbled slightly as he stood up. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, and he grabbed the top of seat 1A to steady himself. He looked down into the suite. The privacy door was not fully latched. Dr. Clark was asleep, her tablet resting on her lap, the screen still glowing. Harrison squinted. He knew he shouldn't look, but he was a man who believed rules were for other people. He leaned over the partition, invading the sanctity of her suite. The tablet was displaying a confidential PDF. Harrison's eyes scanned the header. Project Horizon, Q3 Executive Restructuring Proposal, confidential, for Board of Directors review only. Harrison frowned. Why would she have that? He leaned closer, his eyes focusing on a paragraph halfway down the page. Recommend the immediate termination of the vendor contract with Wellstream Logistics due to consistent failure to meet API integration benchmarks and ethical concerns regarding leadership stability. Harrison froze. He blinked, thinking he was hallucinating. He read it again. Wellstream Logistics. Termination. His company. His heart hammered against his ribs. This woman. She wasn't just a passenger. She was reading a report about his company. A report that recommended firing him as a vendor. What the hell, he whispered. The turbulence jolted the plane again. Harrison lost his balance and fell sideways, his hands slapping against the plastic wall of the suite with a loud crack. Dr. Clark woke up instantly. She saw a dark figure looming over her. Instinct took over. She grabbed her tablet and clutched it to her chest, recoiling. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and alert. Harrison scrambled upright, his face pale. You have my files. Why do you have my files?" "Get out of my suite," Dr. Clark said, her hand reaching for the call button. "No," Harrison lunged, trying to grab the tablet. "That's my company. Who are you? Are you a spy? Are you working for my competitors?" "I saw it. It said Wellstream Security," Dr. Clark shouted. The cabin erupted. The lights flooded on, blindingly bright. Sarah and the purser, a tall man named David, came running from the galley. "Mr. Wells, step back," David commanded, his voice booming. "She has my proprietary data," Harrison screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Vivienne. "She's a corporate spy. She's stealing from me. Arrest her. I demand you arrest the thief in 1A. Harrison was panting, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked deranged. "I saw it. She's trying to cut my contract. Who the hell is she?" Vivienne Clark stood up. She smoothed the front of her suit. She didn't look frightened anymore. She looked imperious. She placed the tablet on her side table, face down. "Mr. Wells," she said, her voice cutting through his hysteria. "I am not a spy. I am doing my job. A job that involves reviewing the performance of third-party vendors who fail to meet the standards of this airline." You review vendors?" Harrison laughed incredulously, looking around at the waking passengers for support. "Look at her. She claims she's an auditor or something. Lady, you probably can't even balance a checkbook. You're reading a stolen document." "Sit down, sir," David, the purser, said, stepping between them. He held out a red card. "This is a Section 21 warning. Physical aggression, invasion of privacy, and disruption of flight operations. You are to return to your seat and remain there until we land. If you do not comply, we will restrain you." "Restrain me?" Harrison's eyes bulged. "I'm the victim here. She's the criminal. She has a document about my company." He looked at Vivienne, his eyes narrowing. "I get it. You're some low-level analyst they flew out to do the dirty work. You think you can recommend firing me? Do you know who I am? I built Wellstream from the ground up. I am a titan in this industry." Vivienne took a step forward, ignoring the purser's attempt to shield her. She looked Harrison dead in the eye. "You are not a titan, Mr. Wells. You are a liability. And regarding the document, I wasn't reading a recommendation from an analyst. I was reading my own notes." Harrison paused, confused. "Your notes?" "Yes," she said. "I was deciding whether to give your company a second chance despite the mediocrity of your software, but given your performance tonight, I think the decision has been made for me." You're crazy," Harrison muttered, though a seed of doubt began to sprout in his gut. "You're nobody." "Sit down, Harrison," she said. She used his first name like a reprimand to a child. "And pray that the police at Heathrow are more lenient than I am going to be." David grabbed Harrison's arm firmly. "Seat. Now." Harrison allowed himself to be shoved back into seat 2A. He felt dizzy. What had she meant? Her notes? He sat there, heart racing, staring at the back of her head. She was bluffing. She had to be bluffing. She was just some affirmative action hire trying to scare him. He would call his lawyer the second they landed. He would sue the airline. He would sue her. He would own this whole damn fleet by the time he was done. But as he poured himself another glass of wine with trembling hands, he noticed something. The flight attendants weren't looking at him with fear anymore. They were looking at him with pity. And they were looking at Dr. Clark with a reverence that terrified him. The remaining 3 hours of the flight were a torture of silence. Harrison didn't sleep. He couldn't. He sat in the dark, replaying the interaction, trying to find the angle where he won. "She's a nobody," he kept telling himself. "She's trying to intimidate me because I called her out." But the seed of doubt had grown into a vine of panic. He pulled out his phone again, connecting to the expensive in-flight Wi-Fi. He searched for Horizon Global Airways Board of Directors. The page took forever to load. The spinning wheel mocked him. Just as the photos began to populate, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are beginning our initial descent into London Heathrow. The weather is a brisk 12 degrees Celsius with light rain. We expect to be on the ground in 20 minutes. Harrison's screen froze. The connection cut as they dropped below the satellite coverage altitude. He cursed and shoved the phone into his pocket. He hadn't seen the list. The cabin lights came up slowly, simulating a sunrise. The flight attendants moved through the cabin for the final check. Usually, in first class, the flight attendants would come to each passenger, thank them by name, and offer a hot towel. Sarah walked up the aisle. She stopped at 3A. "Thank you for flying with us, Mr. Banks. I hope you had a restful sleep." She moved to 2A. Harrison straightened his tie, expecting the groveling to begin. He was ready to issue his list of demands and complaints. Sarah didn't stop. She didn't look at him. She walked past seat 2A as if it were empty. She stopped at 1A. She crouched down, balancing on her heels so she was at eye level with Dr. Clark. Her demeanor was entirely different, professional, yet deeply respectful. "Dr. Clark," Sarah said softly, but in the quiet cabin, Harrison could hear every word. "Captain Miller asked me to inform you that we have been assigned a priority gate. The ground team has been notified of the security incident. They are waiting at the jet bridge." "Thank you, Sarah," Vivienne replied. "You handled the situation well. I've made a note of it for your personnel file." "A commendation." "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot coming from you." Harrison frowned. "Ma'am? Commendation? Since when did passengers give commendations that meant anything?" The plane banked left, the sprawling gray tapestry of London appearing beneath the clouds. Harrison felt a knot of nausea. He needed to get off this plane. He needed to get to his meeting. He needed to regain control. As the wheels touched down with a smooth thud, Harrison unbuckled his seatbelt immediately. "Please keep your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop," the overhead voice warned. Harrison ignored it. He stood up, grabbing his bag. He wanted to be the first one off. He wanted to storm past Dr. Clark and show her that he was still the man in charge. The plane taxied for what felt like an eternity. Finally, it pulled into the gate. The bell chimed. Harrison lunged for the aisle, trying to push past the partition of seat 1A. "Excuse me," he grunted. Dr. Clark remained seated. She was looking out the window, watching the ground crew below. "You're blocking the way," Harrison snapped. "Some of us have business to attend to." "We all have business, Harrison," she said, not moving. Suddenly, the cabin door opened. But it wasn't the usual rush of fresh air and the polite nod of the gate agent. Two uniformed officers from the Metropolitan Police boarded the plane. Behind them was a woman in a sharp navy suit holding a clipboard, flanked by two large men in dark suits who looked like private security. Harrison smiled. Finally. They were here for the spy. He had been right to make a scene. The pilot must have radioed ahead about the stolen data. "Over here?" Harrison waved at the police. "Seat 1A. She's the one. She has confidential corporate documents on her tablet." The police officers looked at Harrison, then looked past him. They stepped toward seat 1A. Harrison stepped back, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Told you," he whispered to the back of Vivian's head. "Karma's a bitch." The woman in the navy suit stepped forward. She looked distressed. "Dr. Clark, I am so sorry. We received the report from the captain. Are you all right?" Dr. Vivian Clark stood up slowly. She picked up her bag. She looked at the woman and nodded. "I'm fine, Elena. Just a long flight with some uninvited turbulence." The police officers didn't move toward Vivienne. They turned and faced Harrison. "Harrison Wells?" the older officer asked. Harrison's smile faltered. "Yes? I'm the victim here. I'm the one who reported the—" "Sir, please step into the aisle and place your bag on the seat," the officer said, his hand resting near his belt. "We have been asked to escort you off the aircraft." "Escort me?" Harrison laughed nervously. "You've got the wrong person. He pointed at Vivienne. "She's the one you want. She's a nobody who stole my data." Vivienne stepped out of her suite. She stood in the aisle, looking taller than she had while seated. She looked at the woman with the clipboard. "Elena, is the car ready?" "Yes, Chairwoman," Elena said. "Straight to the HQ. The board is assembling at 10 a.m. Harrison froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt faint. "Chair." "What?" he whispered. Vivienne turned to him one last time. The look on her face wasn't anger. It was pity. "You asked me who I was, Harrison," she said, her voice clear and commanding. "You said I was a diversity hire. You said I was a nobody." She took a step closer to him. The police stepped back to let her speak. "My name is Dr. Vivienne Clark. I am the chairwoman of the board of Horizon Global Airways. I own the skies you are flying in. And as for your company, Wellstream? She adjusted her glasses. I am the one who decides if you survive the quarter. And Harrison? You just failed the interview. She turned to the police. He's all yours. Vivienne walked past him, her heels clicking on the floor. Elena and the private security team followed her, leaving Harrison alone in the aisle with the police and a cabin full of staring, silent passengers. Harrison Wells opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The woman he had humiliated, the woman he had kicked, the woman he had called a diversity checkmark. She ran the airline. Mr. Wells, the officer said, grabbing his arm. Let's go. Now. The walk from the aircraft door to the terminal felt like a funeral procession. But the corpse was Harrison Wells' dignity. 2 officers flanked him, their grips firm on his upper arms. As he was marched out of the jet bridge and into the bright, sterile light of Heathrow, Terminal 5, Harrison expected to be taken to a private room, slapped on the wrist, and released. He was a CEO, after all. These things were usually handled with a quiet apology and a settlement check. He was wrong. Dr. Clark had not just called security. She had authorized a Level 3 security event. In airline parlance, this was reserved for severe threats to flight safety. In practice, it meant Harrison was being paraded through the terminal like a common criminal. As they passed the gate area, passengers waiting for the return flight to New York stared. But the real horror awaited him at the customs hall. Because he had been flagged as a security risk, he wasn't allowed to use the fast-track lane he had paid for. He was marched past the long, winding queues of the general public. And then he saw the phones. It started with a teenager in a hoodie. Hey, that's the guy from the live stream. Harrison blinked, sweating profusely. Live stream? The teenager held up his phone. On the screen, a shaky video was playing. It was footage from inside the cabin. Harrison recognized the angle immediately. It had been filmed by Arthur, the British banker in seat 3A. The video showed Harrison leaning over Dr. Clark, screaming about her being a spy. It showed him calling her a diversity checkmark. It showed him physically kicking her seat. The caption read, CEO goes full racist meltdown on plane. Harasses black woman who turns out to be the airline boss. Number air rage, number karma, number Harrison Wells. The video already had 400,000 views. That's him, someone else shouted from the queue. The racist guy. Boo, a woman yelled. Shame on you. Harrison tried to shield his face with his hand, but the officer pulled it down. Hands visible at all times, sir. They walked him past the baggage claim. A group of flight attendants from another airline stopped to watch. They whispered and pointed. The aviation community was small. News traveled faster than a Boeing 777. By the time Harrison reached the holding room, every crew member in Heathrow knew his face. Inside the detention room, a gray, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and despair, Harrison demanded his phone. I need to call my lawyer. I need to call my PR team, he stammered. The officer handed him his phone. You have 10 minutes. Harrison's fingers shook so badly he could barely unlock the screen. He had 42 missed calls. Texts were flooding in so fast the phone was lagging. From board member Steve. Harrison, what is this video? Tell me it's a deep fake. Stock is down 4% in pre-market. From wife. The press is outside the house. They're asking if I share your views. Do not come home. From VP of Marketing. We're losing clients. 3 cancellations in the last hour. Call me now. Harrison dialed his lawyer, Richard. Richard, thank God. You have to get this video taken down. It's defamation. She provoked me. Harrison, stop. Richard's voice was cold. I've seen the video. There's no context in the world that saves you from that. You called the chairwoman of Horizon Global Airways a diversity hire while kicking her seat. Do you have any idea who Vivienne Clark is? She's nobody, Harrison screamed, slamming his hand on the metal table. She's just some engineer. She's a legend, Harrison, Richard shouted back. She saved Delta's logistics division in 2008. She consulted for the Pentagon on supply chain ethics. She is the most powerful woman in aviation right now. And you just declared war on her. So fix it. I can't fix it, Richard said. I'm resigning as your counsel. My firm represents Horizon Global in other matters. We have a conflict of interest. And frankly, I don't want my name attached to yours right now. You're on your own." The line went dead. Harrison stared at the phone. For the first time in his life, the silence wasn't a sign of power. It was the sound of a coffin lid closing. A Heathrow immigration officer walked in. He held a piece of paper, stamped with a red seal. "Mr. Wells, Horizon Global Airways has issued a lifetime ban against you. Effective immediately, your return ticket is canceled. Furthermore, because of your behavior towards the flight crew, you have been placed on the international no-fly watch list pending an investigation. No airline in the One World or Star Alliance network will sell you a ticket." "How am I supposed to get home?" Harrison whispered. The officer shrugged. "There's a boat leaving Southampton in 3 days. I suggest you start walking." While Harrison was hyperventilating in a holding cell, Dr. Vivienne Clark was walking into the headquarters of Horizon Global in central London. She had showered in the executive lounge and changed into a fresh suit, navy blue, sharp as a razor. She looked immaculate. There was no trace of the woman who had been harassed at 30,000 feet. She entered the boardroom at exactly 10 a.m. The 12 members of the board of directors stood up. These were the titans of industry: bankers, oil magnates, tech giants, men who usually made people tremble. They looked at Vivienne with awe. Madam Chairwoman, the vice chairman, a lord from the House of Peers, nodded. "We saw the footage. Are you all right?" "I am perfectly fine, Lord Heston," Vivienne said, taking her seat at the head of the massive oak table. "But our supply chain is not." She tapped her tablet, the same tablet Harrison had tried to steal. "Let's skip the pleasantries," she said, her voice projecting clear authority. Agenda Item 1. The Wellstream Logistics Contract. The screen at the end of the room flickered to life. It didn't show charts or graphs. It showed a summary of Harrison Wells' company performance, which Vivienne had been reviewing on the plane. "For 6 months," Vivienne began, "my internal auditors have suspected that Wellstream was overcharging us for back-end API support while failing to deliver on cybersecurity protocols. I decided to fly commercial today, incognito, to review the final reports before making a decision." She paused, looking around the room. "I didn't expect the CEO of the vendor to personally demonstrate the rot in his company's culture, but Mr. Wells was kind enough to provide a case study." She pressed a button. A clip of the audio from the plane played. Harrison's voice, slurred and arrogant, filled the boardroom. "Real power doesn't look like you. You're a diversity checkmark. I'll have you fired." The board members shifted uncomfortably. It was ugly. It was raw. "This is the man to whom we entrust our passenger data," Vivienne said, cutting the audio. "A man who lacks impulse control, who lacks basic judgment, and who views women and minorities as obstacles to be removed rather than partners to be respected." "It's a PR nightmare," one board member muttered. "If we keep them, the public will think we condone this." "Forget the PR," Vivienne said sharply. "Think about the competence. If he treats a stranger in first class this way, how does he treat his employees? How does he treat our data when he thinks no one is looking? His arrogance is a security risk. He believes he is untouchable. And people who believe they are untouchable make mistakes." She pulled up a new slide. "I did some digging while I was waiting for the police," Vivienne said. "Wellstream has been burying 3 major data breaches in the last year. They covered it up to keep our contract. Harrison was desperate to close the London deal because he's leveraged to the hilt." She looked at the board. "I am triggering the moral turpitude clause in our contract, as well as the material breach of trust clause. We are terminating Wellstream effective immediately. We are seizing their performance bond of $5 million. And we are suing for damages caused by the data concealment." "Do we have a replacement vendor?" Lord Heston asked. "I have already drafted a transition agreement with Apex Logic," Vivienne said calmly. "Their CEO is a woman named Sarah Jenkins. I met her at a conference last year. She's brilliant, humble, and, oddly enough, she doesn't scream at people on airplanes." The board chuckled. The tension broke. "All in favor?" Lord Heston asked. 12 hands went up immediately. "Motion carried," Vivienne said. She closed the folder. "Mr. Wells wanted to know who I was. Now he knows. I am the person who just bankrupted him." 6 months later. The rain in New York City didn't smell like the rain in London. In London, the rain had felt like a prelude to his destruction. Here, in the gray slush of a Manhattan November, it just felt cold, seeping through the thin soles of shoes that Harrison Wells would have once thrown in the trash. He sat in the back corner of Daily Grind, a cramped, humid coffee shop on the edge of the garment district. The air smelled of burnt espresso beans and wet wool. There was no white tea scent here. There was no private suite. There was only a wobbly laminate table, sticky with the residue of a previous customer's sugary latte, and the deafening roar of the espresso machine that hissed every 30 seconds, shattering his concentration. Harrison stared at the screen of his laptop. It was a Dell Inspiron, 3 years old, bought refurbished from a pawn shop on 9th Avenue. His MacBook Pro, along with his company phone, his tablet, and his dignity, had been confiscated by the legal team during the bankruptcy proceedings. He hit the refresh button on his email inbox. The circle spun lazily, mocking him. No new messages. He had sent out 42 applications this week. He wasn't applying for CEO positions anymore. He wasn't even applying for director roles. Yesterday, he had applied for a mid-level logistics coordinator position at a trucking firm in New Jersey. The salary was $65,000 a year, less than he used to spend on wine in a single quarter. He clicked on his sent folder, just to make sure the emails had actually gone out. They had. But the silence was absolute. Harrison knew why. The moment any recruiter or HR manager saw the name Harrison Wells at the top of a resume, they didn't look at his 20 years of experience. They didn't look at the revenue growth he had engineered at Wellstream. They opened a new tab and typed his name into Google. And there it was, the digital tattoo he could never scrub off. The video, it currently sat at 15.4 million views on YouTube. It had been remixed on TikTok, discussed on CNN, and dissected in business ethics classes at Harvard and Wharton. The thumbnail showed his face, contorted in a scream, pointing a finger at Dr. Clark. The title was simple and devastating, the face of corporate arrogance. He wasn't just unemployed, he was radioactive. Harrison took a sip of his coffee. It was lukewarm. A year ago, he would have snapped his fingers at a server, demanded a fresh cup, and threatened to have the manager fired. Today, he swallowed the bitter, tepid liquid and said nothing. He couldn't afford a second cup. His mind drifted back to the week that had dismantled his life. It played in his head like a horror movie on a loop. The collapse had been swift, violent, and total. 3 days after the flight, the board of directors at Wellstream had summoned him. He had walked in expecting to talk his way out of it, to spin the narrative. But they hadn't let him speak. The Horizon Global contract represented 60% of our projected revenue for the next 5 years. Steve, his former friend and board member, had said, refusing to make eye contact. Dr. Clark has not only terminated the contract for cause, but she has also shared her security report with our other major clients. Delta has pulled out. British Airways has suspended negotiations. You are toxic, Harrison. And you have poisoned this company. They fired him before he could sit down. Because much of his compensation was tied to stock options, and the stock had plummeted 48% in 24 hours, he walked out of the building with almost nothing. Then came the domestic fallout. His wife, Julianne, had endured his temper and his arrogance for years because the lifestyle compensated for it, but the public humiliation was a bridge too far. The press had camped on their lawn in Greenwich for weeks. Reporters shouted questions at his children. Julianne didn't scream. She just hired the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state. She took the house. She took the Hamptons property. She took full custody. I won't have the boys raised by a man the world laughs at, she had told him as she handed him the papers. And then, the lawsuits. Horizon Global didn't just ban him, they made an example of him. They sued for operational damages caused by the flight disruption. They sued for the breach of the non-disclosure agreements regarding the data he had glimpsed. The legal fees had drained his liquid savings dry. Now, Harrison lived in a studio apartment in Queens with a radiator that clanked and a view of a brick wall. A burst of laughter from a group of college students at the next table snapped him back to the present. They were looking at a phone, scrolling through social media. Harrison instinctively pulled his hoodie up, turning his face away. He lived in constant fear of being recognized, of becoming a meme all over again. He looked up at the television mounted in the corner of the shop. It was usually tuned to a sports channel, but today it was on Bloomberg. The volume was low, but the closed captions were on. Breaking. Horizon Global shares hit all-time high following European expansion. Harrison's breath hitched. He couldn't look away. The screen cut to a live interview on the tarmac at Heathrow. Standing in front of a gleaming new aircraft, surrounded by a team of smiling executives, was Dr. Vivienne Clark. She looked different than she had on the plane. On the plane, she had been quiet, efficient, understated. Now, she radiated a terrifying kind of power. She wore a cream-colored coat that looked soft enough to melt, and her posture was regal. The reporter held a microphone to her. The caption scrolled beneath her face. Dr. Vivienne Clark, Chairwoman and CEO, Horizon Global. Dr. Clark, the reporter asked, his voice barely audible over the coffee shop noise. Analysts are calling this the greatest turnaround in aviation history. You've changed the culture of the entire industry. What was the catalyst? Harrison leaned forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. Vivienne smiled. It wasn't a gloating smile. It was the smile of someone who is at complete peace with their own competence. We realize that excellence isn't about exclusivity, Vivienne said, her voice smooth and articulate. It's about humanity. For too long, this industry prioritized the people who shouted the loudest. We pivoted. We started listening to the people who listen. We built a system where integrity is the most valuable currency. The reporter laughed. You've certainly cleaned house. There was a famous incident a few months ago involving a vendor. Harrison flinched. He wanted to close his eyes, but he couldn't. I don't dwell on the turbulence, Vivienne said, her eyes looking straight into the camera. To Harrison, it felt like she was looking through the screen, through the miles of fiber optic cable, straight into his soul. That incident was a necessary reminder. It reminded us that you can have all the money in the world, you can have the most expensive suit and the best seat on the plane, but if you lack basic respect for the human being sitting next to you, you are poor. You are spiritually bankrupt. And we don't do business with bankrupt entities. Spiritually bankrupt. The words hung in the air, heavier than the humidity in the room. Harrison closed his laptop. His hands were trembling. He felt a phantom sensation on his shin, the memory of kicking her seat. A petty, childish act that had cost him his empire. He had thought she was nothing. He had thought he was a god. He stood up, gathering his cheap coat. He couldn't be here anymore. He couldn't watch her win. He pushed open the door of the coffee shop and stepped out into the biting wind. The rain was coming down harder now, a cold, miserable sleet. He didn't have an umbrella. He just put his head down and walked. He approached a bus stop, waiting for the M104 to take him back to his empty apartment. As the bus pulled up, splashing dirty water onto the curb, Harrison looked up. The entire side of the bus was wrapped in a massive, high-definition advertisement. It was an image of the new Horizon Global first-class cabin, the very cabin he had been thrown out of. The tagline, printed in bold, elegant gold letters, loomed over him. Horizon Global. Respect is our first class. Harrison stared at it. The bus doors hissed open, waiting for him. He stepped up, fumbling in his pocket for exact change. Just another face in the herd he had once despised, entering a vehicle where he would have to stand in the back, while the woman he humiliated soared above the clouds, untouchable. Harrison Wells learned the hard way that character is revealed not when you think you're powerful, but how you treat those you think are powerless. He thought he could judge a book by its cover, but he ended up getting the book thrown at him by the very woman he tried to belittle. It costs absolutely nothing to be kind. It costs nothing to check your ego at the door. But as Harrison found out, the price of arrogance is everything you own. Dr. Vivienne Clark didn't just win. She proved that true leadership is quiet, confident, and dignified. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She just needed to be herself. What would you have done if you were in Dr. Clark's shoes? Would you have revealed yourself sooner, or would you have let him dig his own grave just like she did? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that you never know who you're sitting next to. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.